Okay, I've called this talk "The Long and Short of Obadiah." So I was reading Obadiah recently, and I thought, I'd do a presentation on it. If you don't know, Obadiah is one of the 12 minor prophets. It is also the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's only got 21 verses, so this could be a 10-minute talk. But nothing's really known about the person Obadiah. The book is so short and it doesn't really talk about himself. So we don't really know who he was, but it seems that he was most probably writing around just after the Jews were taken into captivity in Babylon. So around 600 BC type. He was writing at the same time as around Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So basically this little short book, has to do with Edom. Now, Dad actually mentioned it this morning about the prophecy of Jacob and Esau. And Edom, if you don't know, and the Edomites, they come from Esau. And so we'll look at that in just a second. But you might have to click on it. And then hopefully this will work. Not working. Okay, I'll just say next slide. Yeah. Okay, yeah, it's not working. So Edom, this city here is Petra, and that is one of the old cities of Edom, one of the fortresses which they rediscovered in 1800, so only a couple of hundred years ago. But this used to be one of the Edomite cities. Next slide. So the Edomites, this is Israel, as you can see. You've got the Dead Sea here. When Israel split up into two kingdoms, you've got Israel up the north and Judah down south. And Edom took up this bit down here, which is south. But the word Edom means red. So you'll see why in a second. So we'll go to the next slide. So again, Esau, if you know, I'm sure you guys will know, but Esau came from the line of Abraham, and the Bible follows the line of Abraham, essentially. So Abraham was given this promise that his line would be a great people, and that they would be very numerous. Isaac, his son, was given a very similar promise that his descendants would be as the dust of the earth. And Isaac had two twin sons, and his sons were Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, as we know, his line goes on to be the children of Israel and all of those guys. And Esau, his line goes on to be the Edomites and the people of Edom. So we'll start right back in the beginning. So I'll go to the next one. So this word just means red. And if you go to the next slide, and the next one, story of Jacob and Esau. So when they were born, it says, Genesis 25, verse 21, it says, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So Isaac asked the Lord to have some children, and the Lord lets Rebekah, not Rachel, Isaac's wife, have children. And verse 22, it says, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. So usually, a mother will feel the child kicking. In this case, it was the children kicking each other. And in verse 23, it says, and the Lord said unto her, two nations are in thy womb. And next one. Two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So this really interesting prophecy was given about these two twins, that the elder would serve the younger, and usually that was the other way around, that the younger would serve the elder, and that the younger it's talking about here would be the stronger people. And it says, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment. So again, the name Moab means red, and we see that when he was born red. If you go to the next slide, it said they called his name Esau. So it talks about these two boys. And it goes on to talk about when they're older. In verse 27, it says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. So already, we see these two different personalities. And if you've seen Matilda's mum says to the teacher, you chose books and I chose looks. And that's Esau and Jacob right here. It goes on to say that Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So even among the parents were divided which one was their favorite. And it goes on to say, and Jacob sold pottage, which means he made some porridge. In the next one, or stew. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore his name was called Edom. So again, that red is coming back. And the reason it says here that they were called Edom was because of this red pottage that he was given, or the red stew. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. And again, as we looked at this morning, the birthright was essentially the firstborn son inherited the leadership of the family and the authority of his father. And so that was sort of like the double portion of his inheritance that he was given. And so again, in verse 32 it says, thanks. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So Esau decided, he was about to die. Who knows if he was just being dramatic or whether he was actually at death's door. But either way, Jacob decided to capitalize on it, and he said, sell me this birthright and I'll give you some soup. And so it talks about Esau despising his birthright, not really recognizing what it was worth. And so he sold it to him for this stew. And it's just amazing to see the consequences of this action all the way down the track. And we'll look at that soon. But all of that just comes from this one simple decision that he chose, the desires of the flesh, or the needs of the flesh over that promise. And the flow-on effects of that are just crazy. So we'll go to the next slide. And of course, what happened is that Jacob got the blessing from his father, deceitfully, I guess, but Esau did sell it, so it was his. And Esau finds out what's happened, and so he asks his father for a blessing. And Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. He was upset because he had missed out on the first blessing, of course, which goes to the firstborn. Ben's just at the door. And it says, and Isaac his father answering and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be as the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. So he gives this good sort of blessing to start with. You'll be plentiful. And by the sword shalt thou live, and thou shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass when thou hast dominion that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. So essentially what it's saying, you have plenty, but you also live by the sword, which means you'll be involved in lots of wars, lots of battles. You'll serve your brother, even though your brother's younger than you. And it shall come to pass that, when you have dominion, you'll break his yoke from off your neck. So let's talk about, again, feuding between the two brothers. Times where one will have dominion, times where other will, they'll cast off the yoke and will be their own people. And this was a prophecy given to him. And it says that Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. So Esau, after getting this secondary blessing, because of the deceit of Jacob, he felt short-handed, and he wanted to kill his brother. And so, right back here, again, you see the feuding began, and he wanted to kill his brother. If you go to the next slide, later on they do actually meet, and it's just after that passage that Dad was talking about this morning, after he wrestles with the angel. And what we see is that when they actually came together after so many years, they both had families, that sort of thing, and it seemed as if they got together really well. The feuding which they had was over, and they sort of reconciled. And that's the last that we hear of the story of Jacob and Esau together. And we don't really hear about Edom or the Edomites for quite a while after that, until just after the Exodus. And so between this point and when we next see the Edomites, it's about 450-ish years. So quite a lot of time has passed. And if you go to the next slide, what we see is that in this time, the Edomites have grown into a strong people. They've taken over this land. Here's that city I was talking about before, Petra, the one that we saw. And they've taken over this land, and as you can see, this land was very fertile in this sort of area. It was one of the most fertile lands, as you can see, because this Dead Sea sort of just flows into it, like waters the ground. And so this is very fertile type land. If you go to the next slide, I think I've got a couple of pictures. Yeah, so this is the land. It looks so cool, where they lived. As you can see, lots of trees, looks quite fertile, but it was also the home of these incredible mountains made from rock. And the color of the rock, you can't really see so well from the projector, but it's red. And again, that redness of the Edomites sort of comes through. And they built these incredible cities, like in the side of the mountain. So many, incredible things. And it's such a cool place. Anyway, this is where they lived. And I was just reading about this land particularly, and it was saying that, it was one of the most fertile areas in Israel. And it became this sort of caravan route early on where a lot of trade began to happen. I was reading articles about their copper mining techniques and stuff being very, almost futuristic for their time. And salt mining, talks about their agriculture flourishing, cattle raising was all incredible at the time. And so they would trade with these caravans that would come through, they would tax the caravans, and so they became to be this sort of like wealthy nation. And we read in Genesis 36 that they had their own sort of monarchy way before Israel had any kings. These guys had their own kings and their own system set up. It talks about dukes as well of the land of Edom. Anyway, what we see is that in this 450 years before we find them, they had taken over this land. So we'll go to the next slide. So what we see here is that Israel, of course, had left Egypt in the time of the Exodus. They traveled all the way down here, and they had to come to their land, the promised land, which of course was Israel up here. And to get there, they had to pass through Edom, which is the land of the people of Esau. And so if you go to the next one, there's an interesting story that happens in Numbers 20. In verse 14, it says, "And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Thus saith thy brother Israel, Thou knowest all the travail that has befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt. We have dwelt in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel, and hath brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city at the utmost of thy border." So basically he's saying, all of these terrible things have come upon us. You've heard about these things. We're finally making our way back, and now we're at a city at the edge of your border. And then he says, "Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We won't pass through the fields or through the vineyards. Neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand nor to the left until we have passed through thy borders." So he's saying, we're just going to pass through. We're not going to take over any land. We're not going to drink from your wells. We're just going to leave it be. Just let us pass through. And Edom said unto him, "Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come against thee with a sword." so not very friendly. And the children of Israel said unto him, we will go by the highway, and if my cattle drink of thy water, then I'll pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. So they're saying, we're not going to wreck your land with, all these chariots or whatever, I don't know. We're just going to pass through on feet. If we take any water, we'll pay for it, that sort of thing. And he said, thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. So it seems the Edomites came out with the army to sort of dissuade Israel from passing through. And it says, thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border, wherefore Israel turned away from him. And so this is the first interaction we see between these two nations. And it's not necessarily positive, but I mean, it is Edom's land, and so I guess they can do whatever they like with it. They didn't want them to pass through at the time, and it seems they were probably scared about the numbers of the children of Israel. They didn't want to be taken over. They didn't want this land taken from them, and so they didn't want them to pass through. However, what we see is that in the next one, Deuteronomy chapter 2, the next slide, sorry, it says, and commanded thou the people, saying, yet to pass through the coast of your brethren, the children of Esau, this is later on, which dwelt in Seir, and they shall be afraid of you. Again, it talks about the children of Israel being afraid of you. Take ye good heed unto yourselves thereof. Meddle not with them, for I will not give you of their land, no, not so much as a footbreadth, because I have given Mount Seir unto Esau for a possession. So again, later when they were coming through, the Lord said, you're just supposed to pass through the coast. Don't meddle with them. Don't try and take their land. This is for them. I've set them up here, and you guys will just go through the coast. And so even though they had sort of rejected them for passing, the Lord didn't say, go and destroy them, because they were brothers. And so he says, just pass through the coast and leave them be. And again, later on in Deuteronomy, it says, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. So even though the Edomites wouldn't let them pass, they were commanded, don't let this come between you. He's your brother, that sort of thing. And so that is pretty much the last that we hear of the Edomites and the children of Israel, again, for about another 400 years, until through the whole period of the Judges, until Saul is set up as king. And what we see is that in this 400 years, we don't know exactly what happened, but it went from the point where the Lord is saying, don't attack these guys, they're your brother, to all of a sudden the Edomites being listed as among the nations oppressing Israel. And again, we don't know what happened in that 400 years. There's some inscriptions and writings that they found from what they think is the Edomites, where it talks about them having blessings in their writings from other gods apart from the true God. And so Josephus also writes about these guys being involved in idolatry. So whether that came to play in that 400 years and they had sort of turned away from the Lord, we don't exactly know, but it seems that that's very possible. I mean, that's exactly what happened to Israel, and these guys were surrounded again by the Moabites and all those nations that the Lord wanted to get rid of from that area because of their idolatry. So it seems quite probable that idolatry had seeped into their culture within these 400 years. And so 400 years later is when we see, if we go to the next one, so that's some of the writings from Moabites that they've been able to recover. Next one is when we see, King Saul attacking the Edomites. If we go to the next one, we've got a couple of scriptures. 1 Samuel 14, it says, so Saul took over the kingdom of Israel and fought against his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the children of Ammon, and against Edom. So again, Edom is mentioned as one of the enemies of the children of Israel. And we don't know exactly what happened, but it seems like in this stage that they have now become enemies. If we go to the next slide, it talks in 2 Samuel 8 about David. It talks about he put garrisons in Edom, throughout all Edom, he put garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David wherever he went. And what had happened is that David decided when he attacked Edom to appoint sort of governors over the land so that they would be friendly to the Israelites, and they would all get on. And so that's what happened, and that worked well for David's reign and some of Solomon's reign, until a descendant of one of the old Edomite kings sort of escaped into Egypt, and then after he heard that a couple of people died, decided to come back and try and take the kingdom from Solomon. Anyway, what we see is that throughout the kings, basically it's on again, off again, they're fighting, they're not fighting, they're together, they're not together. What happens is that Jehoshaphat, when Jehoshaphat's king, he ruled Edom. When Jehoram is king, the Edomites revolted. They decided to set up their own king again. And that was like status quo for about 50 or 60 years. And then when Amaziah becomes king halfway through his reign, when Uzziah, decides to take over Edom. He takes over Edom. And then again, when King Ahaz is in control, the Edomites defeat Judah. They go back to their land. And then from that time onwards, essentially, they're just in control. And so that prophecy that we saw right back in the beginning of, the brothers, one would be stronger than the other, one would rule the other, but then when the other one had dominion, he'd cast off the yoke. It seems, that's constantly going, and these battles are constantly happening. Anyway, so what we see happen is that, Edom is now in control of itself for a while, and that leads us on to Obadiah. So we're finally there. You've got a bit of context as to who the Edomites are, where they came from, the battles that they had, the ongoing fighting. And then we come to the story of Obadiah. And Obadiah is set, as I mentioned earlier, just after the Israelites had been taken captive into Babylon, or the Jews. And so we'll go to the next one. And the next one. So Obadiah 1, this is reading from the Amplified. It says, "The vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We've heard a report from the Lord. An ambassador has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise, let us rise up against Edom for battle, with the Lord as the commander." So the verse is saying, all right, it's time to get revenge on Edom. And the question is, well, what happened? Why, they've been fighting this whole time. They haven't done anything like especially wrong that would warrant, a whole book about their destruction. But it goes on to explain exactly what happened. So we'll go to the next one. And the next one. So that's the picture of the destruction of Jerusalem as the Babylonians were taking them away. And Obadiah verse 11, it says, "In that day that thou stoodest on the other side, and the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them." So it's saying that when all these people, the Babylonians, everyone who was with them, came to Jerusalem, entered the gates, and carried away the captives, he was saying that you guys behaved as one of them. He says, "But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother, in the day that he became a stranger, neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in their day of destruction, neither should thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress." So again, he's saying what you've done is when you've seen them being destroyed, you guys were rejoicing. You guys were stoked. It says, "You spoke proudly in the day of their distress." And it goes on to say, verse 13, "Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have been delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress." So essentially what had happened is that when the Babylonians came to take over the city, take the people captive, the Edomites saw an opportunity, and they're like, "Oh, that looks nice." And it talks about them going into the city, raiding the city, taking the good things that they wanted, even though these guys were supposed to be their brothers. They had fighting over the past years, but they capitalized on it. Even so much as the people that were trying to escape, it says they cut them off, and they delivered them up into the Babylonians or into death themselves. in the day of their distress. So basically, when these guys are down and the Babylonians are getting them, these guys are getting them as well, and they're getting all their stuff. And so that's what the book of Obadiah is about. It's saying, nah, you guys shouldn't have done that. You guys were brothers. And so because of your actions on this day, you're going to face some dire consequences. And we see exactly what those are. So we'll go to the next one. So just earlier in Obadiah, it talks about what will happen. It says, the pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwelleth in the clefts of the rock. As we've seen, they dwell in the rocks and those mountains, whose habitation is high. Thus saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? And again, the Edomites took pride in a few different things. One of them was the fact that where they lived was very like a stronghold. It was very fortified. It was in the mountains, in these rock palaces. It looks amazing, but it was a stronghold, and they were very proud of that. And then it says, though thou exalt thyself as an eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. So the Lord says, you've exalted yourself, but I'm going to bring you down. The next one. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. So he's saying the people that you trust in, they've deceived you. You know, they're going to come and prevail against you. It says, shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom and the understanding out of the mount of Esau? And again, apparently they had very clever politicians, great statesmen, men of learning and experience, and they relied on these wise men. Again, they had pride in all these natural things, in these people. It talks about various treaties they had used to sort of outwit their neighbors and these sort of things. It goes on to say, and thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed to the end of every one of the mount of Esau shall be cut off by slaughter. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. And so essentially they're saying all these things that you trust in, you know, your stronghold, your wise men, your strong men, all of these things, you know, your relationships with other people, all of these things will be a downfall. And what we see is exactly that. And this judgment was actually backed up in a couple of other books, in Jeremiah and both Ezekiel. We'll go to the next one. Ezekiel 25, it talks about the same thing. Thus said the Lord God, behold, because that Edom hath dealt against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and hath greatly offended, and revenged himself upon them, therefore thus saith the Lord, I will also stretch out my hand upon Edom, and I'll cut off man and beast from it, and I will make it desolate from Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword, and I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they shall do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, saith the Lord God. So because of all these things, the Lord was going to bring this great destruction upon them. And what's interesting, I didn't put it in there, but in Jeremiah, it talks about, it says, as in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the neighboring cities thereof, saith the Lord, no man shall abide there, neither shall the Son of Man dwell in it. So the destruction was going to be so great that it would be like Sodom and Gomorrah. It would be wiped off. The people would be destroyed from the face of the earth, and they wouldn't be seen anymore. And so what happened next? Essentially, we'll go to the next slide. So this was, down. This was these guys. So these guys, the Edomites, they flourished between the 13th and the 8th century. What happened is that, quite interestingly, just after it seems that the Babylonians came and took the Jews out of Jerusalem, soon after, maybe about 50 years, they ended up running all these campaigns against these guys who sort of helped them against the Edomites. And there are records of all these skirmishes and these wars between these two people. And the Babylonians sort of whittled them down. And what wasn't whittled down by the Babylonians talks about neighboring tribes, nomadic tribes from around the area sort of came in, again pushing the Edomites out of their land If we go to the next slide, so the people that remained moved from Edom down here, down to South Judah down here. And this was about the time also that the Greeks came into power, and the Edomites began to be known under a new name, which is the Idumeans, or Idumea was the place. And so that was down here. And so what was left of them, they became known as these people. Again, what we see is that there's this fighting, there's not fighting between the Judeans. The Maccabees, when they were in power, they one of the people that was in power at the time, they decided that these guys, the Idumeans, would become part of Judah. They would adopt all of their religion and convert them all to Judaism. And so that's what happened. And so these guys sort of integrated into Judah, but they lived down here still. And they were sort of seen as second-class citizens. They weren't quite integrated in there. And what's interesting is that Herod the Great, the guy who put all those children to death when he was trying to kill Jesus, was actually an Idumean. He was from that same area. And so it's really interesting that all the way down the line from Jacob and Esau, these two fighting, we've got it down at Jesus and Herod the Great. Again, the same thing. Herod the Great comes from the Edomites, and Jesus came from the line of Jacob. And so all the way down there, they're still fighting, which is crazy. And it goes on to say, if we go to the next, the next one. What's the next? Oh, yeah, that's Herod. And what's next? Yeah. So what happened is that during the Jewish and the Roman War, in about AD 66, there was a leader called Simon Bar Giora, and he attacked this area of Idumea. And it records him just bringing complete destruction to the villages, to the countryside in that region, so much so that the Edomites and the Idumeans have no longer been mentioned in history. They're just completely wiped out. The people were completely wiped out in those Jewish and Roman wars. And just as the Lord prophesied, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, they were wiped off the face of the map. And we'll go to the next one. Obadiah also has the second half to it, which is quite interesting as well. From the Amplified, it says, "For the judgment day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you in retribution. Your evil dealings will return on your own head." So it's saying that just like the Lord has done to Edom and the destruction that has come upon them, the Lord will do to all nations. All nations are filled with pride in where they live and how strong they are, all these different things. But the Lord is saying their evil dealings will return on their own head. It says, "Because just as you drank on my holy mountain, desecrated it in the revelry of the destroyers, so shall all the nations drink continually, one by one." Next slide. "Of my wrath. Yes, they shall drink and swallow the full measure of punishment and become as though they never existed." And so the whole point of Obadiah is to give this example or this parable that just exactly what would happen to Edom, how that the Lord would destroy it for its pride and the terrible things that it has. It's going to happen to the world and the people of the world, because they're puffed up in their pride. They haven't humbled themselves, and they will become as Edom. And if we go to the next one, what's quite interesting about Edom is that the word Edom comes from the word Adam. As you can see, we've got the same letters in Adam as in Edom, and we've got this extra one. And the word Adam also means man or mankind. And so Edom is this parable for mankind that, because they're puffed up in their pride, that pride will only lead to destruction, and their evilness will come to destruction as well. And so it's this amazing parable that the Lord has put in this book, in this short 21-verse book in the Old Testament, full of prophecy and so much meaning behind it. So it's really cool. And just a couple of verses to finish off. It talks about the promise. It says, "But on Mount Zion in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance for those who escape, the pride of the world and the evilness of the world." Verse 21, it says, the deliverers, I think this is still the Amplified, shall go up to Mount Zion to rule and judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom and the kingship shall be the Lord's. So this word deliverers, I think in the King James it says saviors. It's talking about the people who have been saved and tried to save others. And it talks about us. We will go to Mount Zion, which talks about the Lord returning to, of course, and judge the mountain of Esau. Again, the Edomites, or just in general, the people of the world and mankind. So it finishes off with this incredible promise that those who escape the pride and the evil of the world, as we know through receiving the Holy Spirit, they will be able to be delivered. They'll rule and reign with the Lord in the Lord's coming kingdom. And so, it's just this awesome book filled with all of these cool bits and pieces, just in the shortest book of the Old Testament. And I just thought that was quite interesting. So, I'll just leave it there.